I opened the locked trunk and found my childhood drawing, signed with today's date. My hands trembled as I held the yellowed paper. It was impossible. I had made this drawing when I was 8, a lone rider galloping across the desert of West Texas, with my name scribbled in the corner, Jake Morrison, 1987. But the date at the bottom was fresh, written in the same blue ink Jack always carried in the pocket of his shirt, June 20th, 2024. The hot Lubbock wind swept across Jack's porch, lifting the red dust that always settled in the corners. I was there to collect the last of his belongings after the funeral, fulfilling my duty as the responsible brother-in-law as I had for the past 15 years. But that trunk had been locked, hidden under the bed as if it guarded Jack Dalton's most intimate secrets. Now I understood why. "Jake? Are you still back there?" Sarah's voice echoed from the kitchen. My younger sister always had that worried tone when it came to me, like I was a wild horse that might bolt at any second. "Did you find anything important?" Important. The word echoed in my mind as I looked at the other items in the trunk, family photos I didn't know Jack had, letters my late wife Mary had written to him, letters she never told me she sent, and financial documents showing bank transfers I knew all too well. Transfers I had made to Jack over the years, thinking I was helping a brother-in-law in trouble. "No, Sarah," I shouted back, my voice rougher than I intended. "Just some old stuff." But they weren't old things. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed, and each piece I found twisted my stomach more. There were receipts from horse races, loan documents taken out using my name as a reference, and, worst of all, a stack of letters Jack had written but never sent. Letters addressed to me, full of lies about medical emergencies, ranch problems, and financial crises I had rushed to fix. I was 37 when Jack married Sarah. I was rebuilding my life after Mary died, trying to hold together the small ranch I inherited from our father, raising Angus cattle on the dry land of Lubbock County. Sarah was 10 years younger, and Jack was the guy who rolled into town in a convertible Mustang wearing Italian leather boots, promising to make her the happiest woman in Texas. I should have known better from the start. No one comes to Lubbock wearing $1,000 boots unless they're running from something. But Sarah was in love, and after our parents died in the accident, she was all the family I had left. So when Jack started having problems, the well pump that broke, the loan for cattle that never arrived, the medical emergencies that always popped up at the worst time, I was there. I was always there. 15 years solving Jack Dalton's problems. 15 years believing I was helping my sister and her husband build a better life. 15 years being the responsible older brother, the guy who never let family down. And now, sitting on the dusty floor of Jack's bedroom, surrounded by proof that my whole life had been a carefully crafted lie, I finally saw the truth: Jack never had problems. Jack was the problem. I picked up one of the unsent letters and read it carefully. It was dated 3 years ago, written in Jack's slanted handwriting. "Jake, man, you won't believe our luck. Sarah doesn't know yet, but we landed a big contract to supply beef to a restaurant chain in Dallas. The problem is, they want an advance payment to lock it in, and we're talking 50 grand. I know it's a lot, but..." I remembered that letter. Or rather, I remembered the conversation we had on the porch, when Jack told me about the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that would save their finances. I had withdrawn $50,000 from my retirement to loan to him. Jack had assured me it would only be for 3 months. The money never came back, of course. There was always an excuse: the contract was canceled, the buyer disappeared, the lawyers were working on it. And I always believed him, because Jack was family, and family helps family. I kept digging through the trunk and found something that made my blood run cold: a folder with documents from my own ranch. Deeds, appraisals, even photos of the property taken from angles that made it clear Jack had been there when I wasn't. And at the bottom of the folder, a filled-out sales contract. All it needed was my signature. Jack had been planning to convince me to sell the ranch. The sound of Sarah's pickup pulling into the driveway jolted me back to reality. She had gone into town to handle funeral arrangements and was probably expecting me to be done sorting through her late husband's things. Quickly, I began putting everything back in the trunk. I didn't yet know what to do with this information, but I knew I needed time to process it. Sarah had already lost her husband. Finding out he was a liar and manipulator wouldn't bring Jack back or make her situation any better. But just as I was closing the trunk, one last thing caught my eye, an envelope addressed to Sarah, dated just 1 week before Jack's death. It was sealed, never delivered. Even knowing I shouldn't, I carefully tore it open. Sarah, my love, it's time to tell the truth about the money. Jake's going to find out everything soon anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me first. The plan was always. The front door slammed. Jake? Where are you? Sarah's voice echoed through the house, carrying that weariness she had been dragging around since Jack's cancer diagnosis 6 months ago. I shoved the letter into my pocket and locked the trunk quickly. I'm here, Sarah, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm all done in here. But I knew I wasn't done. Not even close. In fact, I was just getting started. Sarah appeared in the doorway with a tray of iced tea, her blonde hair tousled by the hot June wind. At 42, she still had that lost girl look that made me want to protect her from the whole world. But today, seeing her brought a stab of guilt sharper than any wound. You look strange, she said, placing the tray on the old dresser Jack had bought at an auction in Amarillo. Did you find something that worried you? Jack's letter burned in my pocket like a branding iron. Jake's going to find out everything soon anyway, and I'd rather you know first. The words echoed in my mind as I accepted the glass of tea, trying to appear normal. Just some old papers. Bills, that kind of stuff. The lie came easier than I'd like to admit. 15 years of being manipulated had apparently taught me how to lie too. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot where Jack had spent his final months, wasting away from the lung cancer he insisted on hiding from everyone until it was too late. Even that had been a lie, I now realized. Jack hadn't hidden his illness out of pride or fear, he'd hidden it because he'd been too busy planning his final con. Jake, I need to tell you something. Sarah was playing with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger in a way that reminded me of our mom when she was nervous. About the money you lent us over the years. My heart skipped. Did she know? All this time, had Sarah been part of Jack's lies? What about the money? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jack told me you two had an agreement. That you were investing in his ranch as a silent partner. She stopped spinning the ring and looked me straight in the eye. But I never saw any paperwork, Jake. Never saw a contract or anything official. And now that he's gone. The innocence in her eyes broke my heart. Sarah really hadn't known. Jack had made up a story even for her, probably to explain why I always showed up with money whenever they needed it. Sarah, I started, but she raised a hand. Let me finish. I know you gave up a lot for our family. After Mom and Dad died, you could have sold everything and left Lubbock, started a new life somewhere bigger, with more opportunity. But you stayed because of me. She was right, but not completely. I stayed because Lubbock was my home, because the Morrison ranch had been built with the sweat of my grandfather and father, because our family's roots had been buried in that red soil for 4 generations. But I'd also stayed for Sarah. That much was true. You don't owe me anything, I said, and I meant it. Yes, I do. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out across the endless Texas horizon. From here, you could just barely see my ranch in the distance, a small dot in the middle of all that vastness. Jack told me about the loan from last year. The $50,000 from your retirement. 50 grand. Just one of many loans I had made to Jack over the years. In total, I quickly calculated, it was nearing $300,000. Money I could have used to modernize my own ranch, buy new equipment, maybe even get married again instead of spending the last 15 years just holding the family together. Jake, I want to pay that money back. Her words caught me off guard. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Jack left a life insurance policy. It's not much, but it's enough to pay you back at least part of what you gave us. She turned to me, and I saw tears welling in the corners of her eyes. I can't live knowing you sacrificed your own financial security for us. The irony hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah wanted to repay me with money Jack had left, money that came from a man who had conned me with elaborate lies. She had no idea that there had never been any real investment, that every cent I'd lent Jack had gone straight to poker tables in Shreveport or horse races at Ruidoso Downs. I pulled the letter from my pocket, still folded. The decision was made. Sarah deserved to know the truth, even if it hurt. Sarah, before we talk about money, you need to read this. She frowned when she saw Jack's handwriting on the envelope. What is it? A letter Jack wrote to you last week. He never gave it to you. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the letter. I knew I was about to destroy whatever memory she still had of her husband, but I also knew she deserved the truth. And besides, if Jack had been planning to come clean anyway, better she hear it from me now than from him later. Sarah unfolded the paper carefully and began to read in silence. I watched her expression shift, confusion, then disbelief, then something I had never seen on my sister's face before, pure rage. Son of a bitch, she whispered, using language I hadn't heard from her since we were teenagers. The letter fell from her hands to the floor. Sarah sank into the armchair by the window, her face white as paper. He confessed everything? I asked gently. Everything. Her voice was hollow, distant. The gambling, the lies, the fake emergencies. Even the cancer. He knew for 2 years, Jake. 2 years. And he used the illness as an excuse to get more money out of you. I clenched my jaw. I had paid $15,000 for an experimental treatment Jack said his insurance wouldn't cover. In truth, Jack had used the money for one last round of gambling in Las Vegas, trying to win enough to pay it all back before he died. Sarah, I found other things in the trunk. Documents, receipts. I took a deep breath. He was planning to convince me to sell the ranch. She looked up at me, and I saw the same pain I felt reflected in her eyes. For how long? 15 years. Since you got married. The silence that followed was filled only by the wind tapping against the window and the distant hum of a tractor working in the fields. Lubbock at dusk always had a melancholy stillness to it, but today, it felt especially heavy. Jake, Sarah finally said, do you still have the documents? The evidence? I do. I want to see everything. Every paper, every receipt, every lie. Her voice was growing stronger, and I recognized the determined tone Sarah used as a kid, whenever she decided she was going to break in a wild horse or learn a hard song on the guitar. If I'm going to find out my whole life was a lie, I want to know the full truth. I went to the trunk and brought everything over to the bed. For 2 hours, Sarah and I went through every letter, every receipt, every bet slip. As the truth unfolded, I saw my sister change before my eyes. The fragile, dependent Sarah I had spent 15 years protecting was giving way to a woman I didn't know, a woman with fire in her eyes and enough anger to tear down a wall. When we finished, the sun was setting over the plains, painting the sky orange and red. Sarah sat on the floor, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal, but her posture was upright, resolved. Jake, she said, I think there's one more thing you should know. My stomach tightened. What? Jack left debts. A lot of debts. People he owed money to, some of them, some who aren't the kind to accept apologies. Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, fear mixed with resolve. They've already come here twice since the funeral. And that's how I found out that Jack Dalton's problems hadn't died with him. The debts had names and faces, Tommy Rascon and his 2 associates from El Paso. Sarah told me they'd first shown up 3 days after the funeral, driving a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows that looked completely out of place in the rural landscape of Lubbock. Men in suits in West Texas always meant trouble. They were polite the first time, Sarah explained nervously, fidgeting with her hair in a way that reminded me of our mother when Dad came home too late. Said they were sorry for Jack's passing, but that business is business. They mentioned $80,000. $80,000. More than I made in 2 years raising cattle. And probably just the tip of the iceberg when it came to Jack's debts. And the second visit? Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was lower. They weren't so polite. That Tommy guy made it clear Jack's death didn't erase the debt. And that, well, widows can be very persuasive when necessary. I felt my blood boil. I was born and raised in West Texas, where any man who threatens a defenseless woman quickly learns the land still has its own laws. I got up and went to Jack's closet, where I knew he kept a Winchester .30-06, the same one I'd given him as a wedding gift. "Jake, what are you doing?" "Checking if this rifle still works." I opened the bolt and confirmed it was clean and oiled. Jack might have been a liar and a thief, but he took care of his guns. "When did they say they'd be back?" "They didn't say exactly, but," Sarah looked out the window nervously. "Jake, there's something I haven't told you." I stopped inspecting the rifle and looked at her. Over the past 2 days, every time Sarah said there's something I haven't told you, my world flipped upside down. "They know about you." "What do you mean?" Tommy Rascon asked about the generous brother-in-law who always helped Jack out with money. "He knows about the loans, Jake. He knows you have the ranch, knows you're single, even knows what kind of cattle you raise." Sarah sat heavily in the armchair. "I think Jack told them about you." "A lot." The realization hit me like a mule's kick. Jack hadn't just lied to me for 15 years, he'd made me a target for dangerous loan sharks. He'd probably promised that if anything happened to him, I'd cover the debt. "Sarah, do you have any family somewhere else? A distant cousin, someone you could stay with for a while?" "Jake Morrison, if you're thinking of sending me away while you handle this on your own, you can forget it." Her voice had a strength I hadn't heard in years. "Jack may have lied to me about who he was, but I'm not the same naive woman who married him 15 years ago. This is my home. These were my husband's debts. And I'm going to help fix it." Before I could respond, the sound of tires crunching the dirt road caught our attention. Through the window, we saw the same black Escalade approaching, kicking up a cloud of red dust. It was almost 7 p.m., the hour when decent men were already home having dinner with their families. "They're back," Sarah murmured. "Go to the kitchen and stay away from the windows," I instructed, checking the Winchester again. "If things go sideways, call Sheriff Carson." "Jake." "Go, Sarah." She hesitated for a moment, then touched my arm. "Be careful." The Escalade pulled up in front of the house, and 3 men stepped out. Tommy Rascon was easy to identify, short, stocky, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. The other 2 were all muscle, the kind of guys who solve problems with their fists first and ask questions later. I kept the rifle in hand but didn't aim it as I opened the front door. In West Texas, showing you're armed is a polite greeting. It means you respect the situation enough to be prepared. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "How can I help you?" Tommy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Jake Morrison. Jack talked a lot about you." "I'm sure he did." I stepped slowly off the porch, keeping the right distance, close enough to show I wasn't afraid, far enough to react if I had to. "I understand you had business with my brother-in-law." "Had, and still do," said one of the henchmen, a bald man with tattoos crawling up his neck. "Death doesn't cancel debt." "Depends on the debt," I replied. "And how it was made." Tommy raised his eyebrows. "Interesting. Jack said you were the kind of guy who always did the right thing for family." "Jack said a lot of things. Most of them lies." I let the words hang in the warm night air. "What kind of business did you have with him exactly?" "Loans. With interest." Tommy pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it slowly. "Jack owed $80,000 when he died. With 2 months' interest, that's now $95,000. 95 grand for what? Drugs? Gambling?" "Mostly gambling. Your brother-in-law was sure he'd hit it big and pay everything back." Tommy took a drag and blew smoke in my direction. Unfortunately for everyone, cancer got there first. And you think that's my problem because Jack used you as collateral, the bald man said. Said his wife's brother had a cattle ranch, was a man of his word, paid the family's bills for years. Said if something happened to him, you'd cover the debt to protect the widow. Son of a bitch. Even in death, Jack kept screwing me. Jack had no authority to use my name as collateral, I said, keeping my voice firm. And even if he did, contracts with dead men don't hold up in court. Tommy laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Who said anything about court, friend? We're talking about honor. About doing the right thing. About protecting family. The same family he spent 15 years lying to and stealing from? Tommy's expression shifted slightly. What do you mean? I realized I had an opening. Tommy and his men didn't know the full extent of Jack's lies. They really believed he had a stable family and a prosperous brother-in-law who could pay off his debts. Jack stole nearly $300,000 from me over the years, I said calmly. Made up emergencies, lied about contracts, forged documents. I found it all after he died. So technically, Tommy, Jack owed me a hell of a lot more than he owed you. The bald man stepped forward, but Tommy stopped him with a gesture. You're saying Jack was a con artist? I'm saying Jack was a lot of things. But an honest man wasn't one of them. I shifted the rifle slightly, not threatening, but reminding them it was there. And I'm saying I'm not paying off gambling debts for a man who stole from me for 15 years. Tommy dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. I could see the gears turning in his head, weighing how much effort it was worth to chase a dead man's debt when the only living lead was armed and clearly not intimidated. Interesting dilemma, he finally said. But the fact is, Jack owed us money, and someone's going to pay. Then you've got a problem, I replied. Because that someone won't be me. The silence stretched between us like July heat on asphalt. In the distance, I heard a pickup approaching on the main road, probably my neighbor coming home from work, but the sound seemed to break the tension. Tommy looked at his men, then back at me. You seem like a reasonable guy, Morrison. What do you say we make a deal? I'm listening. Jack also told us you raise cattle. Good Angus stock, if I'm not mistaken. Tommy smiled again, and this time it almost seemed genuine. How about 15 head? Good quality, delivered in Amarillo. Call it even. 15 head of my best cattle were worth about 40 grand in today's market. A loss, but far better than 95,000 in cash. And after that, you disappear. For good. Neither Sarah nor I ever see you again. You have my word. In West Texas, a man's word still meant something, even when that man was a loan shark from El Paso. Besides, I could afford to lose 15 head. What I couldn't afford was to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I'll think about your offer, I said. Where can I find you tomorrow? Tommy pulled a card from his pocket. Motel 6, on University Avenue. But Morrison. He paused, looking at me seriously. Don't take too long to decide. My patience has limits, and my bosses in El Paso are a lot less understanding than I am. They returned to the Escalade and drove off, leaving only a cloud of red dust and the scent of cigarette smoke in the night air. Sarah stepped out onto the porch as soon as they were gone. You heard? I asked. I heard everything. She came down the steps to stand beside me. 15 head is a lot of money, Jake. Not as much as 95 grand in cash. And definitely not more than our safety. Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring at the road where the Escalade had disappeared. When she spoke, her voice had a tone I'd never heard before, cold, calculating. Jake, what if there's a third option? What do you mean? She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw something that reminded me of our father when he finally had enough. What if we made Tommy Rascon pay for Jack's lies too? Sarah surprised me that night. After we went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with 2 cold Lone Star beers, she opened a folder I hadn't seen before, a folder full of handwritten notes, printed phone pictures, and newspaper clippings. "Sarah, what the hell is this?" "Homework," she said simply, opening the folder in front of me. "You weren't the only one Jack lied to, Jake. And when I found that out 3 days ago, I started digging. The first thing I saw was a photo of Tommy Rascon in a newspaper from El Paso, dated 6 months ago. The headline read, 'Local businessman under investigation for money laundering.' Where did you get this?" "Internet. Public library. And a few calls to people I know in El Paso." Sarah turned the page. "Tommy Rascon isn't just a loan shark, Jake. He owns 3 restaurants, 2 car washes, and a small casino on the reservation near Las Cruces. All businesses currently under FBI investigation." I kept flipping through the documents. Sarah had done some impressive detective work. She had photos of Tommy's businesses, business license records, even articles about his associates, all with lengthy criminal records. "But the most interesting thing," Sarah went on, pulling a paper from the bottom of the folder, "is this." It was a copy of a financial report Sarah had somehow gotten her hands on. It showed suspicious transfers between Tommy's businesses and various accounts in Mexico, always in amounts just under the threshold that would trigger federal reporting. "Sarah, how the hell did you get this?" She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuine smile. "Remember my friend Linda Rodriguez, who works at the bank in El Paso? Well, she remembers me too. And she also remembers how Jack used to show up there with stacks of cash for sketchy deposits." "You're telling me Jack was laundering money for Tommy?" "Not exactly laundering, more like transporting. Jack made regular trips to El Paso, always with bags of money. Said it was for his cattle business." Sarah pulled out another photo. "This one's from the parking lot of Tommy's casino. Look at the date in the corner." The photo showed Jack's pickup parked beside Tommy's Escalade. The date was just 3 weeks before Jack died. "Sarah, are you suggesting we blackmail a criminal?" "I'm not suggesting blackmail. I'm suggesting we level the playing field." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness of the Texas plains. "Jack may have lied to me about who he was, but he taught me a few things without meaning to. How to read people. How to tell when someone's lying. How to find out what you need to know. I was starting to see my sister in a completely new light. The fragile, dependent Sarah I thought I'd spent 15 years protecting had never really existed. She'd been a creation of Jack, a persona he'd encouraged to keep her under control. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah came back to the table and sat down, her hand steady as she organized the papers. "Tommy wants $95,000 over a gambling debt. But if he's being investigated by the FBI for money laundering, the last thing he wants is attention. Especially attention involving a dead man who was carrying bags of his cash." I started to see where she was going. "You want to use the info about Jack to get Tommy to drop the debt. Better than that. I want to use the info to get Tommy to pay us to keep it from the FBI." The boldness of the plan left me speechless for a moment. Sarah wasn't just proposing we stand up to Tommy, she was proposing we flip the entire game. "Sarah, this is dangerous. We're talking about real criminals, not some barroom cowboys. And they're talking to us, Jake. Regular folks who raise cattle and live quietly. Tommy thought he could come here and intimidate us because he figured we were small-town fools." Her voice was getting harder. "Well, he was wrong about at least one of us." I picked up one of the photos showing Jack entering Tommy's casino. If Sarah was right about Jack transporting money, it explained a lot. The frequent trips to El Paso Jack said were for business. The extra cash he sometimes had to pay off bits of what he owed me. Even the jittery way he'd act when he came back from those trips. "You think Jack was working for Tommy all along?" "I think Jack was working for Jack all along," Sarah corrected. "But I do think he was making a cut transporting dirty money. And when the cancer got worse, he started skimming off some of that cash to gamble, thinking he could win enough to replace it before Tommy noticed." The theory made sense. It would explain why Tommy was so determined to get the money. It wasn't just gambling debt, it was stolen, laundered money. Sarah, if you're right, Tommy has a lot more to lose than $95,000. If the FBI finds out about the cash running scheme. Exactly. Sarah leaned back in her chair, satisfied. Tommy can threaten us all he wants, but at the end of the day, he needs us to stay quiet a lot more than we need to pay Jack's debts. I stared at the documents scattered across the table, genuinely impressed by my sister's work. In 3 days, she had uncovered more about Tommy's operation than he probably thought anyone in Lubbock could. How did you learn to do this kind of digging? Sarah smiled again, but this time there was a trace of sadness behind it. 15 years married to a liar, Jake. You learn to fact-check stories, ask the right questions, follow the money. I just never used those skills on Jack because, well, I didn't want to see the truth. And now? Now I have nothing left to lose. Jack's gone, the lies are out, and Tommy Rascon made the mistake of trying to intimidate the wrong family. Sarah gathered the papers with purpose. Tomorrow, when you go meet Tommy, it's not to negotiate cattle. It's to show him we know the game he's playing, and we know how to play too. Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back. She looked at me with an expression I recognized from our father, that stubborn resolve that meant the decision was made, and nothing in the world would change her mind. Jack stole 15 years of my life. He stole $300,000 from you. And now Tommy Rascon wants to steal another 95 grand for debts that weren't even real to begin with. Sarah stood and walked to the sink, gazing out the window at the land Jack had once tried to convince me to sell. It's time someone paid for all of it. And it's not going to be us. That night, lying on the guest bed in Jack's house, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how the last 48 hours had changed everything. 48 hours ago, I thought I was just helping my sister sort through her late husband's things. Now I was preparing to confront a criminal under FBI investigation, using information my sister, whom I had always thought of as fragile and dependent, had gathered with investigative skills I never knew she had. But the most surprising thing of all was that, for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel responsible for protecting Sarah from everything. Instead, I felt like I finally had a partner capable of standing beside me in a fight. And tomorrow, Tommy Rascon was going to find out just how badly he had underestimated the Morrison family. At 5 in the morning, I woke to the sound of Sarah in the kitchen, making coffee. When I came downstairs, she was already dressed in jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt, work clothes, not morning clothes. Sleep well? She asked, handing me a mug of black coffee. Better than expected. You? Like a baby. Sarah smiled. Jake, there's one more thing I found out last night. Something that's going to make our conversation with Tommy even more interesting. My stomach clenched. Now what? Sarah pulled her phone from her pocket and showed me the screen. It was a photo she'd taken from the window at 4 a.m., showing Tommy's Escalade parked down the road, about half a mile from the house. They're watching us, she said calmly. Which means they're more nervous than they let on yesterday. And nervous people make mistakes. I looked at the photo, then at my sister, and realized that Jack Dalton may have been a liar and a thief, but he'd unknowingly taught Sarah how to become a formidable opponent. Sarah, I said, I think you should be the one to talk to Tommy today. Why? Because he's expecting Jake Morrison, the soft-hearted rancher who always foots the family's bills. He's not expecting Sarah Dalton, the woman who uncovered all his secrets in 3 days. The smile she gave me in that moment was worth 15 years of protection. Sarah parked her red Ford pickup at the Motel 6, on University Avenue at 10 a.m., by which time the Lubbock sun was already hot enough to make the asphalt shimmer. I was 2 blocks away, waiting in my own truck with a hunting rifle in the back seat and my phone in hand, ready to call Sheriff Carson if things went sideways. But watching Sarah walk across the motel parking lot, folder of documents in hand and her posture upright like a prosecutor heading into court, I had the strange feeling that the one who should be worried was Tommy Rascon. She knocked on the door of room 127 with 3 firm knocks and waited. When Tommy opened the door, even from a distance I could tell he hadn't been expecting her. "Mrs. Dalton," I heard faintly through the warm wind. "Where's your brother?" "Jake's busy," Sarah replied, her voice carrying that cold authority she developed over the past few days. "I'm here to settle the business of my late husband." Tommy hesitated. I could see him calculating, deciding whether he should talk to Sarah or insist on waiting for me. After a moment, he stepped back and let her in. 15 minutes later, the door opened again, and Tommy Rascon came out looking like a man who'd just been hit by a freight train. His 2 musclemen followed him, and the 3 of them stood in the parking lot for several minutes, clearly having a heated conversation. My phone rang. "Jake? You can come over now." Sarah's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "I think Tommy wants to talk to you too." I drove to the motel and found Sarah sitting in the only chair in the room, the documents spread out on the bed like evidence in a courtroom. Tommy was leaning against the wall, wearing an expression that mixed anger, respect, and something that looked a lot like fear. "Jake," Tommy said as I entered, "your sister-in-law is a very informed woman." "Sarah's always been smart," I replied, closing the door behind me. "What were you two discussing?" "We were discussing the future," Sarah said, organizing a few papers. Tommy was explaining to me how the money transport business he had with Jack worked. And I was explaining to Tommy what I found out about his other business ventures. Tommy stepped away from the wall and went to the window, glancing nervously at the parking lot. "Your sister-in-law has an interesting proposal, Morrison." "I'm listening." Sarah stood and picked up one of the photos showing Jack entering Tommy's casino. For the past 2 years, Jack transported approximately $1.2 million in cash for Tommy. Money that came from illegal gambling, car washes that never washed cars, and other ventures the FBI would be very interested in investigating. Jack got 5% of each delivery, Tommy added, clearly unhappy to be revealing the information. It was a good deal for everyone. Until Jack started stealing part of the money to gamble, Sarah continued. Altogether, he took about $95,000 he was supposed to deliver to Tommy. That's the so-called debt you came here to collect. I started to see the full picture. So Jack didn't owe gambling debts of his own. He stole money he was supposed to deliver. Exactly, Tommy said. And when we found out, Jack was already dying. Said his brother-in-law would pay it all after he was gone. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. What Jack didn't tell Tommy is that the money he stole came mostly from the loans he got from you over the years, Jake. So technically, Tommy, the money Jack stole from you, was ours to begin with. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Jack had used my own money to steal from Tommy, then told him I'd pay the debt if anything happened. A con within a con, with Jack manipulating every side. But that's not even the most interesting part, Sarah continued, pulling out another document. The most interesting part is that Jack kept detailed records of everything. Dates, amounts, routes, even photos of the pickup and drop-off spots. Tommy turned away from the window quickly. What kind of records? The kind that show exactly how your laundering operation works. The kind the FBI would love to see. Sarah opened a folder and pulled out several typed pages. Jack was meticulous. He even wrote down the license plates of your other careers. The color drained from Tommy's face. Where are these records? In a safe place, I said, starting to understand where Sarah was heading. The question is, what are you willing to do to make sure they stay in a safe place? Tommy walked over to the bed and sat down heavily, picking up one of Jack's record pages. Son of a bitch, he muttered. He documented everything. Everything, Sarah confirmed. Including the names of the cops you pay to look the other way, the judges who fast-track your permits, and the accountants who fudge your books. What do you want? Tommy asked, defeated. Sarah sat at the edge of the bed, facing Tommy. We want you to forget Jack's debt. Completely. And we want you to pay us the $95,000 Jack stole from you. Why the hell would I do that? Because that $95,000 came from the money Jack stole from Jake over 15 years. And because Sarah pulled another paper from the folder, if you don't, tomorrow morning the FBI gets an anonymous package with all of Jack's records, the evidence I gathered on your operations, and a detailed letter explaining how Jack Dalton was used as a courier in your money laundering scheme. Tommy looked at me, then back at Sarah. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering a deal, Sarah corrected. You pay us $95,000 for the records and our continued silence. In return, you never see us again, never set foot in Lubbock again, and you get to continue your activities in El Paso without worrying about what we know. And if I refuse? Sarah stood and began placing the documents back into the folder. Then you can explain to the FBI how a dead rancher from Lubbock knew so much about your operation. And you can explain to your bosses in Mexico why your operation got blown up over $95,000 you could have just walked away from. The room fell silent except for the hum of the old air conditioner working against the Texas heat. Tommy stared at his hands for several minutes, clearly weighing his options. You two are smarter than Jack led me to believe, he finally said. Jack was good at making people underestimate the ones he controlled, I replied. That was his talent. Tommy stood and walked over to a suitcase in the corner. He opened it and pulled out several stacks of cash. $95,000 in cash. You can count it if you want. We trust you, Sarah said, though she did a quick count anyway. And Tommy? If you ever change your mind about this deal, just remember, Jack's records exist in multiple copies, in multiple places. And I've learned a lot about investigation in the last few years. Tommy nodded. Understood. But can I ask you one thing? Go ahead. Why didn't you just take all this to the police from the beginning? Why make this deal with me? Sarah and I exchanged glances. It was a good question, and the answer said a lot about how the last few days had changed us. Because, Sarah finally said, Jack stole more than just money from us. He stole 15 years of our lives, our trust, our peace of mind. The police might arrest you, Tommy, but that won't give us back what we lost. This money is a start. Tommy nodded again, seeming to understand. For what it's worth, you two deserve better than what Jack did to you. Thank you, Sarah said. Now I think it's time you and your men hit the road. And Tommy? If I were you, I'd find a new line of work. The FBI's closing in, with or without our help. After Tommy and his men left, Sarah and I sat in the motel room for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. $95,000, I finally said. It's not even close to the $300,000 Jack stole from me, but it's enough to modernize the ranch, Sarah finished. And enough for me to start a new life somewhere no one knows me as Jack Dalton's naive widow. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized I didn't know the woman sitting beside me. The Sarah I thought I'd spent 15 years protecting was an illusion Jack had created. The real Sarah was smart, capable, determined, and dangerous when pushed. Sarah, I said, why didn't you ever show me this side of you before? She smiled, and it was the first truly happy smile I'd seen from her in years. Because Jack wouldn't let me. And because you were so busy protecting me, you never gave me the chance to protect myself. And now? Now I know who I really am. And so do you. Sarah stood and picked up the folder. Jake, for the first time in 15 years, I don't need protection. I need a partner. As we left the motel, with $95,000 in the back seat and Jack's records finally in our possession, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Not just hope that the trouble was over, but hope that my family, my real family, was finally just beginning. The road back to Lubbock had never looked so full of possibilities.